Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. Welcome to PNACAC's College Counseling 101 webinar series. We are so glad that you joined us on this busy morning. Don't know if anyone's home on a snow day. We had a snow day yesterday in Idaho, but we're back at it today. But other parts of our state now are home with a snow day. So if you're at home or you're in your office, thanks for joining us. My name is Ray Pepley. I'm a college and career counselor at a high school in Meridian, Idaho. Forgot where I was for a second. And I'm joined by Palmer Muntz, and Palmer is a regional college counselor from University of Alaska Fairbanks. If you haven't been there, you should make a trip to the University of Alaska Fairbanks. It's a beautiful campus. Palmer and I are co-chairs of PNACAC's Professional Development Committee. So that's where this series came from, is Palmer and I putting this together. And this is why we're so glad that you're here. We hope that it meets all of your needs. We are also joined by two wonderful presenters. They're going to present on our topic today. What you see on the screen is the new FAFSA, the new and better FAFSA. And I probably shouldn't say do air quotes for that, but it's a new FAFSA that you might recall. Those of you who joined us in October, we had a webinar on the new FAFSA that was going to be released in December. And now here we are, it's been released. And if you're like me in a high school where you have so many students and parents reaching out and asking about different things that they're seeing in the application, and you're like, maybe wait a minute before you get back in. You might be having these, some of the same questions that I have this morning. So thank you for coming. But joining us to share their wealth of knowledge, and I kind of giggle a little bit because both Ashley and Sarah are like, things change every day. But we have Ashley Munro, who is Director of Financial Aid at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And then we also have joining us Sarah Everitt, who is the Student Service, I'm going to mess this up, Director of Student Financial Services at beautiful Gonzaga University. So they will be presenting for us today. The Q&A is open, but the chat is disabled. So if you have a question, maybe listen for a while. And if they kind of pass the section that you have a question in, go ahead and throw it in the chat. And Palmer and I will monitor the chat. And then at the end, we will bring up your questions to the large group. If it's something that you want just Palmer and I to answer, we can do that privately as well. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is that this webinar is being recorded. So if you are interrupted in the middle of the webinar, someone comes into your office and you need to jump off, just know, please, that the webinar is being recorded and we will send it out in about a week. It is a little faster if you access the webinar through Slack, and we have a slide about Slack at the end of this presentation today. So, Palmer, did I miss anything?
I think you got it. I think you got it.
Did I get it? Okay. Well, without further ado, then we will let Ashley and Sarah present.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. Sarah and I are excited to talk a little bit about the FAFSA and some of the expectations and some of the things that we're excited about in regards to the new application that has come out already. Ray mentioned our wealth of knowledge, and I feel like our wealth of knowledge is about 12 days worth of experience with the new FAFSA being open, but hopefully we'll be able to provide some information. With that caveat, we will share that the changes are ongoing. So I've given a similar presentation once in December, once just 2 days ago, and then we still had to make some updates today for things that have come out over the last few days. And I'm sure that we'll continue to see that experience over the next several weeks as we adjust, as we learn some new things behind the scenes, and as we get used to changing our terminology, even down to the systems that we use in financial aid. Most of those have changed names through this process as well. And we're working in the old systems and getting ready for the new systems at the same time. So you may hear us refer to terminology slightly different, but know that we're still meaning the same things. So what we're going to cover here today is just a brief look at the laws. So why did we make this change? Why is the FAFSA so different this year? We're going to look at some of the 24-25 changes, which I know that you all explored if you were in the webinar earlier this fall that Pennac offered. Some of these changes have already been discussed, but we're going to give a little bit of review and then some updates to those. We're going to look a little bit at the application, particularly some of those areas that changed. We're going to talk about timelines and then do a review of FAFSA filing rates. The Better FAFSA, Better Future is the trademarked name of all of this situation, and it refers basically to FAFSA simplification, and it is combined acts of the Future Act of 2019 and Consolidation Appropriations Acts of 2021 and 2022. So it's a lot of pieces of law and legislation that came together to make this new FAFSA be the Better FAFSA, Better Future. With this, the goal is to provide expanded access to post-secondary education, particularly providing predictability and transparency for the Pell Grant and making the application easier. I think we've all worked with students and families who completing the FAFSA is a barrier. People get frustrated with it. It may not be working correctly. Their unique situation doesn't flow well into a complicated application, and they just stop, and they're losing out on thousands of dollars of financial aid, and that may be the difference between them being able to go to college and not. So by providing this predictability, transparency, simplified application, we are hoping to get more students to be able to apply and more families to get through the application so that students can pay for their education. This is also an application that will provide better data accuracy and then therefore reducing the need for verification, which is also a hurdle that comes after the FAFSA application. So you successfully navigate the FAFSA application, and then about a third of students get selected for verification and have to provide additional documents. So this whole process is hopefully going to make this a whole lot easier for most families. Some of the changes have already been implemented. So we started implementation of this 3 years ago now. So in 2021, selective service moved away. We got rid of some limits of our needs-based loan programs. The following year, drug conviction questionnaire and eligibility criteria were eliminated. And then last year, we had some changes in regards to housing and meal definitions, as well as some follow-up requirements for students who are not able to provide parental information. But the big change is coming for the 2024-2025 year. And that is going to be the expansion of the Pell Grant program, allowing for completion dates. So because of all of these changes, we did have to postpone the FAFSA release to December of 2023 instead of October of 2023. So it was about 3 months later. We're also changing the name EFC, the Expected Family Contribution, to Student Aid Index. And then the application is streamlined, and then we have some new terminology. So this is just a slide to go over a little bit more of some of those particular changes. So we have the minimum EFC, expected family contribution, used to be 0. Now the minimum student aid index is going to be minus 1,500. That Pell Grant was directly tied to EFC, but in the case of student aid index, it is not. And then there are some other changes in regards to parent signatures, which parent information is required on the FAFSA, and how those flow through. And Sarah's going to talk about those in just a few minutes. I think that, Sarah, do you want to go ahead and take over from here?
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. And I guess one thing that I just want to acknowledge first, if you haven't heard, which is hard if you work in my world, we for sure heard the FAFSA come up every day, but the FAFSA is now available, and it's available 24/7. So that is good news. There was a soft launch period. Some of this has been difficult, and we'll talk a little bit more about kind of like what we expect timeline wise, but just to put it out there that the FAFSA is now available. And it should be available any minute of the day going forward. At least that's what we understand in the financial aid community. I also just want to acknowledge that this year it's going to be a little unpredictable. I think it's going to require all of us in this work to be sort of flexible in ways that we haven't had to be previously. But ultimately, these things are for the betterment. Like this was really designed with students in mind, and it's stuff that the financial aid community and I think college access community have been advocating for a really long time. So I think it's kind of our role in all of this is to kind of help, you know, to the extent that we can kind of keep families like calm and reasonable, or sort of be a steady force in all of this that tries to remain as positive as we can. Now, internally, we might be frustrated and cranky, but I do think that ultimately this change, as you know, as difficult as it has already been, is ultimately going to be just a much better thing for students and families going forward. And I hope we start to reap some of those benefits very soon. We know that over 1 million people have already done the FAFSA as of a couple days ago. And at least from the students I've worked with that I've heard, the ones who are able to complete it successfully, you know, it doesn't take an hour, it takes about 10 minutes. There's, you know, some still things that need to be worked out, but we're headed in a good direction. One of the other things I wanted to talk about, I generally include this in a lot of my FAFSA presentations, is kind of who should apply. So particularly at a school like Gonzaga, we often hear that families don't want to do the FAFSA because they don't think they're going to qualify for aid. And this is really one of the biggest misconceptions, I think, in our work. So you can see that graphic at the bottom. I know that you all know this probably, but just if you need a tagline to encourage families to submit the FAFSA or encourage students to submit the FAFSA, what I always say is that if cost is in any way a factor of where they're going to decide to go to school, they should be doing a FAFSA, particularly in that first year. And that, I think, is just one of the kind of barriers and the battles that we're always going to be sort of fighting, particularly with families that fall in maybe a middle income range that think that, oh, I'm not going to qualify for Pell, why bother? Well, as you know, again, you all know that the FAFSA is going to be used to qualify for federal, state, and any school-based financial aid. Most schools, this is the only financial aid application they'll use. And that is true of my school and really most of the schools in the West Coast. Some might also use a supplemental application like the CSS profile, but by and large, they're also going to require a FAFSA too. And I just wanted to share one statistic that I was actually sort of surprised by as I was preparing to do some of these presentations, is that I took a look at Gonzaga's financial aid, and I promise I'll drop the Gonzaga specific stuff in a minute here, but I just thought it was really interesting that the median income for families receiving need-based aid from my institution anyway was around $140,000. And I think that threshold, or that median, sort of right, the midpoint, is a lot higher than I think I would have expected, or just the general perception is. So I share that just to give you some context. If you need a data point to, you know, kind of try to help convince someone to do a FAFSA, there it is right there. Ashley and I were also talking about how there are a lot of outside scholarship or private scholarship processes that are going to require a FAFSA, even if they might not be offering need-based scholarships. That's another reason. And then if a student intends to borrow student loans, they're going to need to do the FAFSA application as well. So now that I've convinced all of you to convince your students to apply, let's talk about how to prepare to submit the FAFSA in this new world. There's a QR code on the screen. We can also, I believe we can share the link in the chat. If not, we'll be sure to share it with PNACAC so it can all get out to you. There is a really great federal student aid YouTube channel with some 2- and 3-minute videos on a bunch of different topics related to the FAFSA. They probably have about 10 videos or so out there. And one of the great videos is how to prepare to submit the FAFSA, because there is a lot of terminology that's changing and we're getting used to. So the first step on how to prepare to submit the FAFSA is going to be to identify the FAFSA contributors. Contributor is one of these new terms that we get to get used to. This is sort of a new concept. And we're going to talk on sort of who should be contributors here in a second. But just know a contributor is anyone who's asked to contribute or give their information to the FAFSA. Contributor does not imply that it's someone that's required to contribute financial resources. It's really just information contribution to the FAFSA. Once the contributors have been identified, students are going to need to create a studentaid.gov account, and really any contributor is going to need to create that studentaid.gov account. That's sort of the official account that allows someone to sign this federal form. And then another just kind of best practice, this isn't a requirement, but is just to kind of gather the documentation that the student or family might need to complete the application. This could be tax returns, records of child support payments, current balances of cash savings and checking, investments, business farms, and then to create the FSA ID, the contributors will need legal name, birth date, social security number, and an email address. So before I dive into contributors in depth, I think it's also important just to cover FAFSA dependency. I imagine this group is pretty well versed with FAFSA dependency. But again, I think it's just important to touch on because it feeds right into that FAFSA application and kind of who contributor is. And if we can help students sort of get this right from the get-go, it's going to make the rest of the process go a lot easier. So for students, the dependency status is going to determine whose information has to be reported on the FAFSA. And really, broadly speaking, there's obviously exceptions, but broadly speaking, most traditional age college students are going to have at least one parent on the FAFSA. The box in green up there has sort of the exceptions to dependency status. And we'll talk, I think we have some slides in here about kind of how to manage those exceptions, but most often a student is going to have at least one parent as a contributor if they're in the kind of traditional college age population. There are a lot of quick or logic kind of built into the FAFSA and sort of questions that sort of help students get at this as they do the FAFSA. But I think it's just important kind of baseline knowledge for us to sort of understand who might need to have their information on that FAFSA form. Okay, so let's go ahead and really define contributor. Again, contributor meaning contributing information to the FAFSA. And a contributor is going to be the student. The student will always be a contributor. If the student's married, it would also include their spouse. A biological or adoptive parent may also be a contributor. And if in the case of divorced or separated parents, a step parent may also be a contributor. More on that in just a second. I think it's also important to call out who would not be a contributor. So if there are grandparents who are raising a student, but they haven't legally adopted the student, they would not be contributors, nor would foster parents or legal guardians. Siblings, again, even if they're raising the student, would not be considered a contributor unless there is a legal adoption that's happened. Same thing is true with aunts and uncles. So we're really looking at sort of the student's legal parents, emphasis on kind of the legal, as many of the people on that right-hand column, I think could be, a student could consider their parent, but unless there is a legal relationship there, that is not required. Okay. We have a graphic up here that was really adapted from a worksheet that the Department of Education filled out. So first, one thing to know about the FAFSA is that built into the form is who is my parent wizard. So again, the form is going to help students kind of understand these, but I think it's also helpful to kind of have students be thinking about this information ahead of time. So what this says essentially, if the parents are married and not separating, both parents' information has to be included on the FAFSA, regardless of whether your parents are the same or opposite sex, or regardless of whether the parents are same-sex couple or opposite sex. If the parents didn't file taxes jointly, then both will need an FSA ID to be contributors. If they did file taxes jointly, one parent can sort of confirm that information and give consent to have that tax information included on the FAFSA. If the parents are not married to each other, but live together, both of their information needs to be on the FAFSA form. If the parents are divorced, separated, or were never married and didn't live together, the parent who provided more financial support during the last 12 months is the contributor, and they're the ones who have to provide that information on the FAFSA form. If both parents provided the exact equal amount of financial support, or if they didn't support the student financially, it would be the parent who has the greater income and assets, and that is what needs to be provided on the FAFSA. And then if that parent is remarried, it would also be step-parent information if even if that step-parent is not providing financial support to the student. So this is a lot of information, and I think really kind of sharing the resources, the workflow, and encouraging students to use the FAFSA wizard will be the best option here. And largely, this hasn't changed too significantly from prior guidance on who is the FAFSA parent. The biggest thing that has changed is the marker for which parent should be on the FAFSA is more about financial support now than it is about kind of who the student lived with more often. So we will make sure you have the resources, the federal resources for this graphic as well. And I think I'm handing it back to Ashley.
Yes, I was just having a conversation with a parent yesterday that was talking about, they don't really track who pays for what. And so I just started asking a series of questions in regards to, who's providing medical insurance, who's doing this, who's providing the most housing. And we kind of started to see a pattern, but it was also still going back and forth. And I think we ended up with, because they also made the same amount of money or close enough, we also ended up with, if your son is sick, who are they calling, mom or dad? And then that ended up being the parent that we went with, is the kind of who would be the one responsible for taking him to the doctor, who would probably be using their insurance, who would probably be paying that bill. And so that was one that we just kind of got a conversation leading down to, when it really is an equal split and they make the same amount of money, who's, it really could go either way in those cases according to the law. So that was just a fun conversation to have with someone who's filling out the FAFSA for the first time.
Hey, Ashley, before we dive into kind of the nuts and bolts steps, we had a really good question that I'm not sure that we touch on, and that's students whose parents don't have Social Security numbers. I think, and Ashley, correct me if I'm wrong, that this is kind of a known issue at the moment, that unfortunately, students whose parents don't have Social Security numbers, there has been a process developed for them to submit FAFSA information. But I'm not sure that every student in that situation has been able to successfully do that. Have you heard any more on that issue?
The last I heard is that they did know it was an issue and that it was being worked on. I have not seen a date on when they expect that to be resolved.
And we're hearing that it's still not working. So I think that with some of this, that we have a listserv through our National Professional Association, and we can certainly kind of report this or make sure it's been documented as a known issue. But a lot of our schools' advice is going to, for the next few weeks at least, is going to be to wait a week and try again, which is really, really, I don't love that answer at all. But I think because some of these things are still being worked out, that's kind of where we're at.
I know that in general, the FSA tech team has been completely overloaded lately. I know that we have some technical difficulties and other things, and we were basically just told that the priority right now is the FAFSA and the FSA ID information before they work on other items. And so just know that they are working on it, and we will hope it will be resolved rather quickly. They've been working through their backlog list very fast.
We'll also share, there's a list of known issues if it's helpful. And I do also see some of the chat about deadlines. We'll talk about timeline in a bit. I imagine things like the Gates Scholarship and other sort of larger organizations are also following these issues, and I'm hopeful that we can all be flexible. But you know, it is the timing of this is what we're really feeling at the moment as well. So we feel your pain and are advocating as best we can to get these things resolved and helping people understand just that this is a big issue.
And Shannon was on top of it and has the list of known issues website already up in the chat or in the Q&A. So I'm going to repost that into the chat so that everyone can see it, and you can kind of follow that if you'd like. So jumping back into the actual FAFSA flow, the contributor is going to be invited by whoever starts the application. So either the parent starts the application and then the student gets invited as a contributor, or the student starts the application and the parent gets invited, or spouse, or however your flow is going to be. Probably for most of your students, it's going to be a parent. The FAFSA is going to provide that smart logic to help you identify who's going to be needed as a contributor. And then the applicant is going to need to provide the name, date of birth, social security number, and a unique email address for the contributor to log on with their FSA user ID. So here's where it's important that one of those pre-FAFSA application steps is going to be to gather that information so that it's ready to go, and making sure that it's accurate. We have seen parents in the past mix up social security numbers, mix up birthdays for children when they have multiple children. So we just want to make sure it's all ready and all ready to go. Probably fixing a social security number is probably one of the hardest FAFSA errors out there. It takes a lot of additional steps, both for the student, family, and the school. And so that to me is one of the tips, is making sure you have the right social security number with the right birthday with the right name. You can create a studentaid.gov account before you go in to complete the FAFSA. It could be a few days beforehand. It could be a month beforehand, whenever you want to get in and get completed. But you are going to need that social security number and a unique email address. So that is where we've had some issues in Alaska in regards to that unique email address. We do have families that all share the same email. And so sometimes when there's multiple parents that are going to need to contribute, they are going to need separate email addresses or unique email addresses in order to get their FSA account. Another tip here that I like to share for students is not to use your school assigned email address. This FSA user ID is going to be with you all the way through your college education into your student loan repayment. So it could be with you for the next 10 to 15 years. And by using your high school email address, if you do ever need to reset it or to access login codes because you forget your password, it's going to kind of default back to that school assigned email if you never update it. So hopefully these days, I feel like most people probably have a personal email outside of a school assigned email, but that's I highly recommend that they use a non-school identified email address. Again, once they complete the FAFSA, they're able to start it as a student or a parent. I imagine that there's a lot of parents out there who are going to be initiating it on behalf of their students. So it's now more clear in regards to the roles. I feel like that's really great language, and the understanding that parents do get online and try to do this on behalf of their student. So this is one area of the change that I'm very excited about. And I'm hoping that this clears up a lot of miscommunication in regards to whose information you're putting in. It used to be kind of when mom was completing the FAFSA on behalf of the student, they would get sometimes mixed up and answer questions as themselves instead of the student. But this is going to make it a lot more clear, and I'm very excited about this particular piece. And Sarah, I'm going to pass it over to you for a moment.
Awesome, thank you. I apologize, I was catching up on the Q&A. So The next step in completing the FAFSA is going to be the dependent student sections. They're going to provide their identity information. They're going to provide consent, which again is this idea that they're consenting to have their information transferred from the IRS directly to schools. They're going to be asked a series of personal circumstance questions to help determine that dependency status. They'd be asked to provide parent information, assuming it's confirmed that they are a dependent student. They will get an e-signature page. And then at this point is where they would invite those other contributors, most likely parents, to complete the FAFSA form. And then at that point, the parent would receive an email from Federal Student Aid. They would kind of get a couple of onboarding screens to help them understand the FAFSA, what they're being asked to do. They'll define some terms in that part of that onboarding process, talk about what to expect, and then kind of the next steps. They're going to enter or confirm kind of their demographics, give that consent to have the IRS data transferred to the school, and submit the form. The parents that I've talked to that have been successfully able to do this piece of it is, it's like 5 minutes, no problem. Where we've seen challenges more is sometimes the parent doesn't get the email, or the parent who's getting the email isn't the right parent. But when this works, it works like almost too well, because people say, wait, that's it. So hopefully that's a little encouraging as you're helping families navigate this process. One thing that's important that I'm not sure we've acknowledged that is either the parent or the student can start the FAFSA. Those sort of last 2 slides would just kind of be flip-flopped. The parent can start and send information to the student to kind of have them do their section. So once both or sort of all contributors have completed their part of the FAFSA, they'll get a confirmation page that sort of lays out the next steps. This would also have the student, for the student version, it will also have the student aid index, as well as DRN or a data release number, in case they need to give another party access to log in and see their FAFSA information. One of the challenges that we're not quite sure, because universities and colleges haven't started receiving FAFSA data, but one of the challenges that I think we're kind of anticipating is that the FAFSA isn't considered complete until all of the contributors have done their part. And what I think is going to be a little challenging for schools is that we won't have any visibility into those incomplete FAFSAs. We didn't previously, so perhaps this is just a, will be a non-issue, but it does give me a little bit of concern not being able to know, if a student comes to us and says, do you have my FAFSA? If, we'll be kind of blind in that way. So just something to kind of keep in mind as we're feeling our way through this first phase of the launch.
On that note, Sarah, and along with a question that came in the chat is, Department of Ed has shared that inactive, incomplete applications will be deleted in 45 days and that the student would have to restart. And that has always been the case. There's always been a 45-day limit of how long an inactive, incomplete application would be available in the system. So we would expect something to happen within 45 days, and that could even be the student going back in and just logging into their FAFSA to see their status could reset that 45-day clock. Again, this is one where it hasn't been 45 days yet, so we're not exactly sure how it's going to work, but it'll be something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I know for schools, our next big milestone is the ability to receive and then import FAFSA data, and sort of what that looks like. That's kind of what we're anxiously awaiting as a big milestone in the next step, which we're told will be happening towards the end of this month. So let's go ahead to the next slide, which is common FAFSA questions. Ashley, if I could use your help. So just a couple of reminders on sort of frequently asked questions, or maybe a better way to say it is sometimes people don't ask this question, they just make a mistake and we find it. And one of the biggest ones is the assets that students and parents are required to report. There are some changes to this from previous years. So one of the changes is that a parent or a student, if they're receiving child support, is going to need to report the amount of child support they received as an asset. Remember, all of the income information is coming through the IRS. There's no longer an opportunity to report untaxed income. So the solution to kind of still take into account child support received in the formula is to include it as an asset. Student or family would also report the net worth of businesses that they are kind of their immediate family own. If it's a shared asset with other family members or other people, it would be sort of the value of their percentage ownership of that business. Another change is that families are also being asked to report the net worth of a farm. And this would include fair market value of the land, the buildings, the livestock, the unharvested crops. I had a family ask how they determine the net worth of the farm, and that is not something I am familiar with at all. And so this is not something, unless it was an investment farm, this is not something that was previously asked to be reported on the FAFSA. So I think we'll continue to get questions about this. We also should get better guidance for families on sort of what that constitutes. Another change is that education savings accounts that are going to be designated for the student also are reported as well. So let's talk about some of the nuance of that. Essentially, the guidance is that if the 529 plan or the education savings plan is owned by the parent of record and is for the benefit of a dependent student, it's considered to be an asset and it should be reported on the FAFSA. The parent of record would then report it as one of their assets. They wouldn't report the value of that asset if it is designated for other children or the portion designated for other children. If the account is completely in the student's name, it is still reported as a parent asset. And then because there's a lot of logic built in, and I think as the media got a hold of some of this, one of the great things about the FAFSA is when the demographic questions are being asked, one of the questions is, does your family receive means tested federal benefit programs? And that will essentially allow them to skip a number of questions on the FAFSA. So I wanted to include just sort of what those programs are, and they are listed up here. Again, there's logic and help text built in to the actual FAFSA form to help students receive this. But if you are working with families that are receiving any of these means tested benefits, they should absolutely be submitting the FAFSA. Okay, Pell Grant eligibility. Ashley, is this you?
Yes, I'm happy to talk about this one. So with the new FAFSA comes a new aspect of determining federal Pell Grant eligibility. It used to be tied directly to the expected family contribution. There would be a very complicated Pell Grant chart for every $100 of that EFC with lots of other charts in there. I don't know if you've ever seen one, but it's usually about 8 pages long, very, very fine print. We're happy to say that has been eliminated and it's a little more streamlined now, although I'll admit, I think financial aid administrators are going to miss our tables and charts while we get used to this. But there's essentially 3 ways a student can qualify for a Pell Grant. They can qualify for the maximum amount of Pell Grant, and this is for students with less than 0 less than 0 student aid index. And those are often going to be our students who, or parents who are not required to file taxes. And they're going to be automatically assigned that negative 1,500 SAI. It is also going to be based off of the adjusted gross income and some poverty guidelines and tables. A student can also qualify for a Pell Grant for a minimum Pell Grant, and that is going to be based off of household size, the adjusted gross income, and poverty guidelines as well. So the maximum Pell Grant right now is scheduled for $7,395, although I think we're kind of expecting that to go up this spring and get increased slightly with some budgets. The minimum Pell Grant is, I can't remember the exact number, it's somewhere around $800 for the year. So there's either a maximum, minimum, or somewhere in between, which is going to be a student with a student aid index that is going to be less than 7,395, which is that max Pell right now, but more than 0. And then the Pell Grant amount is simply going to be what that maximum Pell Grant is minus the student aid index. So if the student aid index is 1,000, we're going to take 73.95 minus 1,000 to give them a Pell Grant for 63.95. And that will all be available in a student's financial aid package, so they don't necessarily have to wonder what that is going to be. It will be available on their student aid report when those are complete, as well as available on their school's financial aid packages. So that's something that we'll be doing as a school once we start receiving FAFSAs. Another change with Pell Grant is knowing that students are going to get Pell Grant amounts based off of per credit that they take in school. So part-time students are going to have a little bit more flexibility in the amount of Pell Grants. So for example, in the past, it was kind of, if you were in a 6-credit class, 7-credit class, or 8-credit class, it was all the same amount of Pell, even though your tuition and fees may have been a little bit more for 6, 7, or 8 credits. And now that is going to be split out. So 6 credits will get 50% of the Pell, 7 credits will get 58% of the Pell. So hopefully that allows for some students who maybe can't go full-time, but they still want to go part-time. They may have a little bit more Pell Grant eligibility to use to help pay for those part-time classes. The big one that I'm excited to talk about is the timeline. And I know that there's been some questions in here about the timeline. So of course, the FAFSA became open for the first time on December 31st. It was only open for about 30 minutes that day as part of a soft launch. January 4th, the soft launch continued, but it expanded to being open about 12 hours a day. So it did shut down at 8 o'clock Eastern time, which made it maybe slightly difficult for some of the families in our areas to get the FAFSA completed. They would have had to done it during the day instead of at night after work. January 9th is when the FAFSA was announced that it was open 24 hours a day. So I think that's rather exciting, especially in Alaska with being 4 hours behind Eastern time. And I know we have friends in Hawaii that are trying to get the FAFSA completed and they weren't able to get online during evening hours. But now that has been resolved and the FAFSA is open 24 hours a day. There is a pause right now. So while the FAFSAs are being submitted, the Department of Education's federal student aid has not been able to actually process those FAFSAs. And that is going to begin by January 31st. We have not seen a date, at least not as of yesterday. I didn't check any of the listservs yet today to see if a date was released. So everything is being held right now. Students are still getting confirmation pages, but they're not going to get student aid reports until the FAFSAs are processed. So we are telling students January 31st, but it could be a little bit beforehand. Sarah, have you seen any dates yet for that today?
No, we haven't seen dates. And I just want to clarify FAFSA. So students are doing the FAFSA, they're getting kind of their minimal sort of output from it, but there is a bunch of database matches that we assume that connection from the IRS is working because there's our SAI is being generated, but the sort of citizenship, student eligibility, there's a bunch of other stuff that needs to happen kind of behind the scenes for FAFSA to be considered processed. And that's what's hopefully happening in some format right now. And they're working towards scaling up to large production, but I haven't seen any additional information other than the very general timelines of end of January for that.
Which does mean until those are processed, schools are not going to be able to receive FAFSAs. And so that's going to be happening in February. This is also dependent on schools' technical resources. Because of the drastic changes in the application, we also need pretty drastic technology changes. So our systems that we use to award students and disperse their aid and track their eligibility all needed to get different tables, different views, different markers, different flags, and all of those main companies have been working on that, but due to FAFSA delays, they're also delayed, which delays schools. So we're all in a little bit of a delay jam, traffic jam, waiting for things to get released so that upgrades can be done. So schools are going to be able to implement that on a sliding scale, some maybe as early as early February, maybe even late January, early February. Some schools may not be able to get those implemented until March or April. And we're seeing a wide variety of availability of those technology releases, although we're hoping that a majority of the larger schools are likely going to have these in February to early March. So once we have our technology in place, once we're able to download FAFSAs, then we'll be able to start financial aid packaging. And packaging is where we are looking at everything a student may be eligible for, from Pell Grant to needs-based loans to institutional aid and scholarships from our school to non-needs-based loans. And we're creating a package for a student. And then once that package is created, we'll be able to send out our offer letters to those students. So hence I think someone had the question earlier about the Gates Millennium Scholarship having a deadline of February or January 15th. I think there's a lot of schools and a lot of agencies right now that are knowing that these timelines may not be working and making some adjustments. For example, at my school, we have a February 15th scholarship deadline, and we've always encouraged students to complete the FAFSA before February 15th. But we already know that on my campus, we're not going to be able to pull in FAFSAs by February 15th. And so because of our technology releases, so we've just eliminated that FAFSA requirement for our scholarships this year. And we're just not going to have that information. Scholarships won't be awarded based off of the FAFSA. We'll use other data instead.
Actually, I just wanted to add, I think that Gates Scholarship is a really good one. The more that we as schools or scholarship agencies can hear from people who are doing the FAFSA, having like a hard time doing the FAFSA, and sort of advocating for students, I think the more flexible people will be. January 15th feels like a ridiculous deadline, because even if the student has done the FAFSA, there's no information other than an SAI that hasn't been validated, to kind of share. So I hope, like Gates would be flexible, but I do think, if you can help students either advocate for themselves or advocate on their behalf, that would be really good. And we'll be doing that as well. There's a couple other things I just wanted to add on the timeline. One thing that we're going to go into here in a second that we're sort of missing, though, at least on my campus, is usually we're working with FAFSA data by November. And while this whole timeline isn't, being backed up by 3 months like the FAFSA was, what we're losing is the ability to do quality assurance in the data that we're receiving, and also do outreach to students who we think, have indicated on their admission application that they want to apply for aid, but we haven't received their FAFSA yet. There's a whole bunch of that communication that we're gonna have to do in a really sort of compressed time frame, or just kind of omit in this cycle, because we know that students and families, what's most interesting to them is that financial aid offer letter. And the plan is that the FAFSA will be available on October 1st or in October, kind of going forward. This is sort of a 1-year thing, but just kind of wanted to sort of make you aware how this compression just gets, sort of hard on the campus side, while we're recognizing that we want to get information out to students and families, we also want that information to be accurate and like, you know, the actual amount of financial aid that they're going to be receiving. The other question I see in here is, are schools considering adjusting May 1 decisions? That has not come up on my campus yet. I think, again, that next big milestone is if and when we get FAFSA information, if the import process goes smooth, if the software updates are solid. I think that you know, we traditionally have financial aid offers out by March 1st, and I have not ruled that out as a possibility for Gonzaga. And if we are pretty close to that deadline, or that sort of time frame, then I can't imagine that we would adjust the May 1, because there's a lot of other stuff that has to happen between May 1 and when students come. But I do think that there is sort of conversation in the community, but there's still some other dominoes kind of that need to fall in order to kind of understand where we might need to be doing that. What I'll also say about Gonzaga specifically is that if there's individual circumstances that warrant a student needing beyond May 1, then by all means put them in touch with us. But I've not heard conversation about a college-wide decision to bump May 1 back at all, like there was in 2020 around the pandemic. So
I think in general, when in doubt, call a financial aid office, either you with the student with their parent, whatever it is, having a conversation with a live person and explaining the situation that, you know, you really want to go to the school, but you're just not quite ready because of these other things. I think working individually with the school, they'll be able to let you know how strict they're going to be on that deadline. But oftentimes, just in general, talking with a financial aid officer, talking with an admissions counselor, I think there's some flexibility in a lot of different areas that we just can't be on a large scale. And that comes to unique situations and decision information. So whether that's you're not able to provide your parents information, your parents have had a change in income, there's been a death in your family, there's been something else. Schools are not able to just say blanket, yes, we're going to do this for everybody, but we can work with students individually to be as flexible and as understanding as possible. The last bit here is we just wanted to talk a little bit about FAFSA filing. A lot of studies have shown students who complete the FAFSA are more likely to attend higher education, whether that's community college, or technical schools. They're part of the change in the FAFSA and making it easier is that FAFSA filing rates have been steadily declining quite a bit, with a very steep drop off in 2020 for pandemic, and it hasn't really gotten back to where it could be. The national FAFSA tracker does track per state. So this is as of June 9th, 2023, which is the last time that they ended up pulling some data on their site, but you can look at your state and see where you fall. I happen to be in the state in the very bottom, which is sad. We've been trying to work our way up with various things, but we obviously have a long way to go. I did look at PNACAC states, and so we're all pretty much in the bottom. Oregon has the highest at 35, but the rest of us are pretty low in regards to FAFSA filing rates. The top FAFSA filing states, Louisiana, Tennessee, District of Columbia, Illinois, and New Jersey, have various programming. Louisiana is a state that actually requires the FAFSA before you graduate from high school, as is Illinois. So just wanted to bring that to your attention. We are always trying to find ways that we can encourage and support more families to complete the FAFSA. And so any ideas that you have at your school, anything that you feel works at your school and you want to share with the industry as a whole so that we can take that into account. There are FAFSA filing incentives discussions in states right now. So right now there's 5 states that require high school seniors to complete the FAFSA for graduation, California being, I think, the most recent right now, but the only one on the West Coast. New Hampshire is joining with the class of 2024, so that will be added in next year. Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts are currently having this requirement in the legislative cycle, and it does seem like it's going to move forward likely for the class of 2025. So as more states adopt this, there typically is a trickle effect where, you know, once you reach a threshold of states, it kind of moves forward from there. So I know Alaska, I think it's been mentioned once or twice, nothing serious yet. But the more states that do it, the higher likelihood that this will be a discussion in your state is going to pop up. So we want to find ways that we can encourage or support families to complete the FAFSA without requirements right now, and are always open to learning more about what we could be doing to help students get the information they need to make informed choices about higher education.
Actually, I think it's interesting talking about this and also talking about the new FAFSA, because I think the new FAFSA is a really interesting case study. And I know I've worked in financial aid for close to 20 years, and I heard seeds of FAFSA simplification, FAFSA changes probably throughout my entire career. And it took that long to kind of like advocate and then legislate the kind of change. So I think that this could be another piece of the puzzle as we move through FAFSA simplification of just, I don't know how totally I feel. I need to look at more information on sort of high school requirements to do the FAFSA. But in the meantime, I think really, there's very few families that can write a check for college. It's just, it's out, the price is kind of outpaced, and I work at a private 4-year school, and sort of very much feel in the conversations and families how much, how hard it is for so many people. I also know that there are a lot of resources available to students. Like I mentioned, there are, a lot more students are qualifying for need-based grants, particularly institutional need-based grants. So I always go back to if cost is going to be a factor in kind of where or whether you go to college, at least do the FAFSA to make sure you're maximizing aid.
Yeah, so that's all we had prepared for today. And so I know that I'm willing to take questions and volunteering Sarah. We put her email address on here, so I'm assuming she's also willing to take any questions that you may have, follow-up questions. But of course, we always do encourage students to check with the schools that they're interested in, because a lot of this is federal, so it works for everybody, but we all have individual policies, procedures, and timelines that may differ depending upon the type of school or which school that you're going to. So we encourage students to reach out to those schools, but we're more than happy to help make some connections or to help answer any questions that you have in regards to the presentation today.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say I love hearing from counselors. I can't always give confidential information back from people who are working in the high school, but I can facilitate that. Really don't hesitate to ask questions or encourage students to ask questions. We have specific appointments available for students just needing help with the FAFSA. And we're working with, families all over the place. So we're pretty well accustomed to doing that. So even if Gonzaga is not a choice, we just want to help students submit this information and do the FAFSA. So don't hesitate to reach out.
There is one question in the chat.
Yeah, I see a couple of questions, one in the chat, and then we have one Q&A that I was going to answer live that are more specific. So the question was, does the education benefit plan or 529 plan need to be reported by a grandparent for the student? And the answer to that is no. And part of the reason I wanted to answer it live, because I wanted to sort of expand on this idea. Only assets that are owned by the contributors have to be reported on the FAFSA. So even in the case, like if there's a divorced parent situation and the parent not on the FAFSA owns the 529 plan, the 529 plan does not need to be reported on the FAFSA. So just as a kind of a general rule, only assets owned by the people who are providing information on the FAFSA need to be reported. And then the other question we have about school with free and reduced lunch, do they need to report assets? Can you speak about this now? If a student is qualified, so my understanding is if a student or family or anyone in their family is qualified for federal means tested benefits, that they would not be presented with asset information on the question on the FAFSA. Is that right, Ashley?
Sorry, I was actually looking at one of the other questions and I just missed what you said. Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, just for students who either they or their family qualify for federal means tested benefits, they are not asked asset information on the FAFSA. Is that correct?
That is correct if they have a certain AGI as well. So
Okay.
there's a threshold in there and it depends on which formulas and a bunch of different things. So it depends. Our favorite financial aid answer is
yeah. The other question I see, I'll take it because it is in my home state of Washington. So the question is, at what point would college recommend a student to apply for WASFA, which is the undocumented or the FAFSA form for undocumented students who are Washington residents, if the FSA ID challenge doesn't get fixed. If the student is a US citizen, we're gonna need to get that federal form fixed. They could do a WASFA, but essentially we in Washington would need that kind of federal form to be fixed. So Andrea, if you want to get in touch, we're happy to kind of help with that student. The other thing I'll say, and I think this is true at a lot of other schools like Gonzaga, is whether or not we receive a FAFSA on January 15th or March 15th or April 15th or June 15th, those financial aid packages are all the same. There's not limited aid that we run out of. And so the advantage of sort of doing the FAFSA early is getting the information early. It's not kind of first come, first served on aid. And I'm grateful for the state of Washington that has enabled us to kind of make that commitment. It hasn't always been that way. But, you know, just to kind of take a little bit of the time pressure off for some of these things. I know there's other deadlines and other schools that work differently, but hopefully that helps relieve a little bit of that pressure as well.
Let's see.
So I see kind of a follow-up question to like where the whole school is eligible for free lunch. I do agree that I think that might get a little bit confusing. I know that's why I'm anxious to get my hands on data so we can do some of that validation. But because there is also an income threshold, I'm hoping that it won't be like too massive of a swing where if a student didn't get that right the first time around, updating it won't have like dramatic impacts on the financial aid eligibility. But until we can start analyzing data on a student level in our system, we won't quite know the impact for that. If I haven't seen the question, or I can't remember if I've seen the question, but if there's specific feedback about where students are getting stuck, you can email me. I will pass it along to our NASFA colleagues who are in like direct connection with the Department of Education. Part of the reason that I was so excited to be able to do this webinar is we just want to be hearing what issues are coming up so we can either help address them or sort of get that feedback back to the Department of Education.
Great.
Another question I see in the chat is, have net price calculators been adjusted for the new FAFSA calculations? I think the answer is some, yes and no. Our net price calculator does have a SAI calculation in it. The challenge with the net price calculators is it's typically based on historical awarding data. So sometimes that might get a little bit lost in translation. So I would hope that would still give you a pretty good, accurate estimate, but it's likely not going to be exact. I don't know if it's helpful to share, but when I did analysis of kind of Gonzaga's population, really 2/3 of the students, their financial need didn't change dramatically. It might have changed by a digit or two, but it didn't sort of swing them out of Pell eligibility to non-Pell eligibility. So I think a lot of our senses for how much aid a student could receive based on their family situation, we don't need to like massively readjust those models that we're kind of using, if that makes sense, because by and large, families are either going to have kind of roughly the same or a little bit more financial need in the new model than they did previously.
Great. Yeah, awesome. I don't think I see any other questions. So, and some people look like people have had to jump off, but thank you, Sarah. Appreciate you so much. Everyone, Ashley had to jump off and go to another meeting. So that's why you don't see her lovely face anymore. But Sarah, thank you. I have a full page of notes.
Awesome. And I just want to say that my email address, I am genuine in that I would love to hear from you and help challenges or get you connected with resources. So please do not hesitate to reach out. Again, we're available and ready to kind of help students as best we can navigate this process. And thank you for your partnership and all you're doing to help students as well.
And I know Ashley would say the same thing, and she's very responsive.
So great. Yeah. So I hope you guys have considered joining Slack. So Slack is just a great program that will allow you to have access to these materials a little quicker than we usually get the information out through email. So Slack is, I don't know if you have like Teams, or I don't have Google, but I don't know if Google Classroom's like that, but it's just a nice little community where the CC101 participants can get together. Oh, my announcements are going to come on. Hang on.
Yeah, I'll jump in and just say, so Slack is a tool that we're trying to utilize for PNACAC for carrying on dialogues and information. And so I think everyone who has registered for these webinars has received an invitation to Slack. If you have any difficulty with that, let us know.
Yeah. And I'm very excited about the next webinar in February. So you can see it on your screen. It's demystifying the financial aid offers. And if you're like me, students walk in with those offers and say, hey, can you help me understand what this means? Oh, this I think is going to be great, just a great experience for all of us. So I'm looking forward to that one. I hope you can join us. And then again, this is being recorded. So you will have access to that and to this webinar after today, faster in Slack. So hope you join us there. Well, thank you again, everyone. Appreciate it. Have a wonderful day and take care.
Thank you.